goals. That is it. And of course, that has accumulated in 2 wins. They have gone 10 games without scoring out of those last 15. Now let's welcome in, shall we, Julien Laurens. Unfortunately, was at the game because we were all focusing on the cup final, Jules. By the looks of it and from what we saw, it was another performance from Chelsea that was well short of any sort of level that you would expect from this club. And once again, in front of goal is where they're letting themselves down.
Completely. I mean, certainly really far from the kind of performance you expect from a club like that has spent that money and that is having a starting lineup like the one it was tonight, this afternoon, because it was there's talent in that squad, there's talent in that team. I mean, they didn't even let themselves down in front of goals because they didn't have any chances. Pretty much, there's one for Kai Havertz at the end a little bit, but this is it. Apart from that, they still don't produce enough with the ball. They don't create enough because they don't play as a team. There's no cohesion. We've said that many times. It's still a sum of individuals. You give the ball to Sterling. He tries to do something on his own. You give the ball to Joao Felix. He tries to do something on his own. There's no triangles. There's no overlapping. There's no players coming inside. There's just none of that at all. I mean, I don't know what they do at training every day, but you don't see a team playing. And there's one time in the first half where there's a ball from Enzo over for Joao Felix who missed. Apart from that, this is all they had in terms of slight creative move where you find someone, you make a run, and then the ball comes to you. Otherwise, there's just none of that. And it's crazy, really. They make mistakes, of course, on the 2 goals. I mean, the first one, since we were kids, coaches tells you never clear the ball in the middle of the pitch. And what do Enzo do? Enzo just clears the ball right there in the middle on Oliver Skip, who then, okay, it's a good shot, and maybe Kepa should do better, but it's a shambolic defending again, and then the marking, like Craig said. How can Sterling, he's in charge of marking Harry Kane, is beyond belief, really. So they make mistakes that are not all on Potter, but overall, this is just a team that doesn't function, that doesn't work together, and that's his fault.
Jules, are we anywhere near that conversation with regards to Potter's future?
I mean, we have to. We've said we can give him time. There are circumstances. He arrived, halfway through the season. The squad is not his. It's a big squad. There's a lot of players there. Some that he probably wanted, others he didn't want. Even in the new signings, it's not easy. We get that. But there's no improvement. I mean, again, I don't know what they do at training. You don't see any progression. You don't even see the beginning of... Yeah, the Dortmund performance is not too bad because they can play on the counter, and again, there is talent in that team, so if you give them a bit of space on the counter, especially, it's easier than like today when they actually have to play in the opposition half with some sort of structure because they don't have any of that. So I'm sorry, but right now he can find all the excuses he wants. Oh, the preseason was the worst ever. It's not. They didn't lose today because of what happened in July in the United States. This is not true. He can say anything he wants, but this is him trying to find excuses that he's not the man to blame, but he has to take the responsibility, like he said today. But the responsibility means that they're not good enough because he's not good enough, because he hasn't been good enough so far since he took charge. And he had time, he had a lot of money to spend. He's got an army of sporting director that he can say, listen, I want this guy, and what about him? And this, they still don't have a goalkeeper, they don't have a striker, and they don't have another midfielder to play with Enzo. So it's a complete shambles. And I think, unfortunately for him, he is the man responsible for it.
It's a tough one. There are mitigating factors, but he needs to get enough results to get to the end of the season. Now, what does that look like? I don't know. He, in another part of his press conference, pointed to Mikel Arteta. He mentioned Jurgen Klopp there, which I don't think people are really...
I don't think anyone's calling for Klopp
Jurgen Klopp to go. I think people are just wondering if Jurgen Klopp can bring that energy and sort of that fear back to Liverpool. He did point to Mikel Arteta and say, look at those struggles of Arsenal and look where they are now. Which is correct. Talking about Arteta being sacked and all this, 12 months, 18 months ago. But then Arsenal didn't spend this kind of dough, this kind of money on these kind of players. Now, maybe that's part of the problem. Having such a huge, stupid squad.
Yeah.
Utterly stupid. And we've talked about this. Trying to manage training, never mind games. Keeping everybody happy. Trying to keep everybody happy. But unfortunately, that's what he's been dealt. And he has to deal with it. But it looks to me with these results that I don't know if some of these players are really pulling their weight for him, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it's starting to look to me. You know the scenario at Man United when Ranić was there and at the end Solskjaer, that one or two are just picking their salary up and doing just enough to keep the fans off their back but put them on the manager's back. That's kind of how it's looking to me as well. And that's a huge concern for any coach.
That's the feeling, isn't it? We talk about characters at Manchester United and how they've come together under Ten Hag. You just don't see that here.
No, I think that is because of how big this Chelsea squad is and how individualistic so many of those players are.
But there has to be progress, isn't there? There has to be a sign that something is happening.
I think what is saving Potter is how much more around the club is just a shambles. That how much dysfunction there is at Chelsea at different levels. They're spending money, but every other aspect of the club is a total mess, and that's both affecting and saving Graham Potter. Now, to that point, and yeah, okay, you use Arteta as an example, great, but look at Manchester United. We just got to speaking with them. Ten Hag comes in. That club needed a major, readjust. And he did so over the course of a season. He got rid of what he thought was causing some of the issues. He brought in cheaply a player in Weghorst that nobody saw, but he knew what he wanted. And he went out and he got that player. Everybody knows that Chelsea needed a striker. Now, again, because of how shambolic things are being run, a striker not coming in, nobody knows whether to blame Potter, whether to blame Bowley, whether to blame whether to blame the tea lady. Nobody knows who to blame around Chelsea's failing transfer policy, where they're spending a lot of money on. And that's saving him, but that's also, it gives him a lot more to do, but he's not making much of a change.
He's in this position where, not today in particular, but some of the games, Dortmund away, they actually played well, but can't put the ball in the back of the net, right? He's almost in a scenario where it's the opposite would be better, where they're not playing particularly well, but at least they've got somebody to stick it in the net and drive some results in the meantime, until he can get his style that Jules was talking about, his philosophy, working on the training. It's like Man United today. They weren't great, but Casemiro got a goal, and Rashford continues goal-scoring run, and it gets the job done. Yeah. And all of a sudden, everything's rosy, when Newcastle actually played pretty well for long periods. So it's not going to go away having whatever amount of possession, passing it around, and then having the goal-scoring stats that they do. That is not going to save his job. Mm. It is just not. But I'm kind of 50-50 on this. I want to see the guy I want to see him given time, because he's proven himself as a coach. But ultimately, he's at a club, and I agree, Shaq, they're a shambles in terms of their squad recruitment. But ultimately, the supporters will drive the opinion and the pressure on the board. And that's starting to creep in, and it's creaking at the moment for him, absolutely.
Jules, I can hear the Tottenham fans now. Hey, wait a minute, we won this game 2-0 and you haven't spoken about us once. Let's talk about them, shall we? Sum up Spurs for us.
They were very solid. There was nothing special about the performance. It was exactly the same team that beat West Ham in a similar game in a way, which says a lot about Chelsea, by the way. But they were very solid. They were sound defensively. Romero bullied Kai Havertz and bullied everybody that he had in his zone. They did nothing really extraordinary in the sense of when they had the ball. Kulusevski was again the only really with Kane, the only really creative touch, but Richarlison just tried to fight with everybody on the pitch, and that was it. And the rest, they took their half chance on the first goal, really. I mean, he hit it well. Skip even said after the game that it was not even the cleanest of strike, but again, exploiting the mistakes made by Kepa first and then Enzo and then maybe Kepa again, because he could have maybe saved that. And then the marking on the set piece, really. But apart from that, there was a couple of counter-attacks in the second half. but they almost knew that at some point Chelsea would make mistakes, that as long as they stayed solid, Spurs, and didn't give away any chances, didn't make any stupid mistakes, then they knew that at some point they will have that kind of chance to come, because that's the kind of team that Chelsea are right now. And they were spot on because they kept their shape well, they defended well, they were aggressive when they had to be, and then they were just very solid, and it worked. And it was just so, at half time, it was 0-0 and not much had happened, to be fair. It was pretty boring. But you kind of knew that in the second half, where usually Spurs are better, that something like that would happen, and you could have predicted that second half. It was so obvious, and I don't want to come back on Potter, but taking off Joao Felix, for example, when he was clearly Chelsea's best player, was complete nonsense. And on the other hand, Spurs didn't do any of that nonsense. They kept it really safe and solid, and in the end, that got them the win.
What did you make of the red card being rescinded, Jules?
It was really comical. I have to say, being in the stadium where they didn't put on the screens that there was a VAR check. So we were just there waiting. He put a couple of yellows first, and then you could see him standing in the middle of the pitch. And we clearly knew that he was waiting for VAR to say something, but because they didn't announce anything, usually they say, oh, VAR is checking the penalty, VAR is checking violent conduct, VAR is checking this. But we had no instructions, so we were all waiting there just before the break. Some people were halfway through the stairs to go to the toilet, to go to get their beers. And it was just like, okay, what's going on here? And then suddenly he goes and looks for Ziyech, gets the red card, and we're like, what, red card? So everybody goes, cheerio. And then suddenly you could hear he's listening again, and he goes, oh, wait, Ziyech, stay here, don't go into the tunnel. It was an absolute shambles. And then he said, okay, let me go and have a look. So then it's almost like they forgot how VAR was working. So they gave the red before he could check the screen. It was really mental. And once again, I think the referees and the VAR assistant, whatever they called, ridiculing themselves. It was ridiculous.
And then, of course, Spurs fans bringing up the incident with Casemiro, where, of course, he got the red card for the hand on the throat earlier in the season, saying, well, what's the difference?
Well, he didn't grab him by the throat. Again, we were covering the other game, so I've only seen a couple of clips of this, but when Ziyech pushes his hand out into the shoulder, it does sort of ricochet up into the face. And I always think it's dangerous and stupid to get involved. But yeah, I'm as confused as anybody with what was happening, so I'll leave it to the referees.
I thought it was a yellow. I thought overturning the red card was the right decision. I thought the Casemiro one was a yellow as well. So I'm going to...
Well, you need to look up the laws.
No. Let's not go back down that road.
I don't know if
page 14.
I don't know if Mark Clattenburg's with us. Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.